When was the last time you felt truly free? And not free as in no work tomorrow, not free as in no responsibilities for the weekend. I mean genuinely deeply free, at peace inside, unaffected by what other people think of you, unshaken by things that are out of your control. Most of us, if we're really honest, we have never felt that, not truly, because there is always something pulling at us, someone's opinion we're worried about, some outcome that we're terrified that it won't go our way, some version of our life that isn't matching the version we imagined. Now, let me tell you about a man who had none of that freedom. On paper, he was born into slavery. He was legally the property of another human being from the day that he entered this world. He couldn't choose where he lived. He couldn't choose what he did. He couldn't walk away from anything. And yet, he was the freest person in the Roman Empire. His name was Epictetus. And what he understood about freedom, real freedom, is something that most people living in the most free societies in human history have completely missed. Epictetus was born around 50 AD in a city called Hierapolis, which is in modern day Turkey. He was born to a slave woman, which meant that from the moment of his birth, he was also a slave. Not through anything he did, not through any failure on his part, simply because of the circumstances he arrived in. He was eventually sold to a man called Epaphroditus, who was a freedman, meaning someone who had himself been a slave but had been freed, who worked as a secretary to the Emperor Nero. And Epaphroditus was, by most accounts, a cruel man. There is a story about him, and I want to tell you this story, but be careful because it's a little bit disturbing. But it's also the most revealing moment in understanding who Epictetus was. Epaphroditus once decided to torture Epictetus just to demonstrate power, just to show that he owned him completely. He grabbed Epictetus's leg and began twisting it, and Epictetus calmly said, "You are going to break it." Epaphroditus didn't stop. He kept twisting, and Epictetus said again with complete calm, "Did I not tell you?" And he wasn't screaming, he wasn't begging, he wasn't even in rage. He just gave a quiet, factual observation. This is going to break. And then it actually did. And then the observation was confirmed. Now I've been thinking about that story for a long time. And I think most people read it and focus on the physical pain. How could someone stay truly calm through that? But that's not actually what's interesting about it. What's interesting is what it reveals about how Epictetus understood the difference between his body and his mind. His body could be hurt, it could be broken. It wasn't fully his to protect. But his response, his judgment, inner state, that was completely his. And Epaphroditus, with all his power, couldn't touch that. That distinction between what is yours and what isn't became the foundation of everything Epictetus could ever teach. Epictetus was eventually freed, most likely after Nero's death. And when he became free, he didn't rush to accumulate the things that had been denied to him. He didn't chase status or wealth or even revenge. He went to a classroom. He started teaching philosophy. And what he taught completely changed the ancient world. And I believe if you really sit with it, it can change yours too. Let me show you what I mean. Epictetus had one central idea, one thing that he came back to again and again and again in everything he taught. And it's so simple that when I first heard it, I almost dismissed it. He said, some things are up to us and some things are not. That's it. That's the beginning of everything. Some things are up to us, like our opinions, our choices, our values, how we respond to what happens. These things are completely within our power. Nobody can take them from a man, not even a man who owns him legally. Some things are not up to us, like our bodies, our reputation, our money, what other people think of us, whether we get the job, whether the relationship works out, whether we get sick. These things are outside our control. And according to Epictetus, that's exactly where most of us spend almost all of our mental energy. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's true. I think most of us are constantly anxious, constantly stressed, constantly unsatisfied, not because our lives are bad, but because we are exhausted from fighting battles that were never ours to win. You cannot control whether your boss respects you, but you can control the quality of your work. You cannot control whether someone loves you back. You can control whether you are someone who is worth loving. You cannot control the economy, but you can control your response to it. Epictetus called the things outside your control indifferents, not because they don't matter in a practical sense. Of course, your health matters. Of course, your relationship matters. But because your peace, your freedom, and your fundamental well being should not depend on them. And here's why that's revolutionary. If your happiness depends on things outside your control, and most people's happiness does, then you are never truly free. You are at the mercy of circumstances, of other people's moods, of luck, of timing. But if your peace lives inside you, in the quality of your character and the integrity of your choices, then nothing external can permanently take it from you. A man can break your leg, but he cannot break that. Epictetus knew this. He had lived it. He hadn't read it in a book. He had tested it against one of the most extreme circumstances a human being can face, and it held. But here's the part of Epictetus' story that I think is the most extraordinary. Because after he was freed, after everything he went through, the emperor of Rome decided he was dangerous. Not because Epictetus had an army, not because he had money or political influence, because he had ideas. And ideas, to a tyrant, are the most threatening thing in the world. In 89 AD, the emperor, Domitian, a man who ruled through fear and paranoia, expelled all philosophers from Rome, all of them. He viewed philosophy as a subversive, dangerous, an invitation to think for yourself, which is the last thing a tyrant wants. Epictetus was among those exiled. He left Rome and traveled to a small city called Nicopolis in northwestern Greece. And there, in exile, in a place he hadn't chosen, under circumstances he couldn't control, he opened a school. And people came from all over the empire, sons of senators, men of wealth, people who had everything that Epictetus had never been allowed to have. They traveled for days to sit in his classroom. Now I find that deeply interesting. Here is a man who was expelled, who was an ex-slave, who had almost nothing materially, and the most privileged people in Rome were coming to him to learn how to be happy. He lived in a small house, almost no furniture. He owned a lamp, which was stolen from him once. And when someone told him about it, he said simply, "The thief needed it more than I did." It's not performance. It's not like a spiritual exercise, just his genuine response to the situation. The lamp was a thing. Things can be replaced. Things were never what made his life good. What made his life good was already inside him. Now, here is what I find remarkable. And this is something I genuinely didn't expect when I first started studying this. 2,000 years after Epictetus taught in his little school in Greece, a psychologist named Albert Ellis came along and developed something called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is now the most widely used and evidence-backed form of psychological treatment in the whole world. And the central idea of CBT is exactly what Epictetus taught, that it's not events that disturb us, it's our judgments about these events. 2,000 years, same discovery. One man figured it out in chains, the other figured it out with a psychology PhD and a research team. That's not a coincidence. That's the truth, expressing itself across time. So I want to bring this home the way I always try to do, because this philosophy isn't meant to live in a classroom in ancient Greece. It's meant to live in your life right now, in whatever situation you're actually in. Let me ask you something. What are you most anxious about right now? Don't just think about it abstractly. Actually name it in your head right now. Name this thing that keeps coming back. Now, let me ask you something. Is it yours to control? Is it actually within your power to change? Or are you spending your energy on something that, no matter how much you worry about it, remains in someone else's hands. And I'm not saying the worry isn't real. I'm not saying the stakes aren't real. I'm saying that Epictetus, who had more reason to be anxious than most of us will ever have, he found a way to put his energy only where it could actually do something. And that freed him completely. He once said something that I think is one of the most quietly devastating sentences in all of philosophy. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquilla full of life." I know that sounds difficult, and it actually is. It goes against every instinct we have. We want things to go our way. We want the world to match our expectations. But Epictetus is saying the peace you're looking for doesn't come from the world cooperating with you. It comes from you releasing your demand that it must. He wasn't a man who had nothing to lose saying this. He was a man who had already lost everything multiple times and had found, beneath all of that, something that couldn't be taken. That's what he was offering. Not a comfortable idea, a proven one. Epictetus died around 135 AD in the small city where he had been exiled. He had no family of his own for most of his life, though late in his life, he reportedly adopted a child of a friend to save the child from being abandoned. He died with almost nothing material to his name, and he left behind ideas that 2,000 years later are still being taught in every psychology program in the world. I keep thinking about what that means, that a man who was legally owned by someone else, whose body could be broken, whose freedom could be taken, left something behind that is genuinely indestructible. Because that's what ideas are. When they're true, they don't age, they don't expire. They just keep finding people who need them. You found this video for a reason. Maybe you're going through something right now, something very hard, or maybe you're not. But you sense that the way you have been thinking about things isn't working the way you hoped. Either way, I think Epictetus has something for you. So the question I want to leave with you today is simple. What is one thing that you've been fighting for control over that was never actually yours to control? Let me know in the comments. And if this gave you something real today, a real change, make sure to subscribe. This channel is here to make a real change in your life, and it will always be.